Bring him home now. A federal judge in Maryland making that directive to the Trump regime in a powerful order. Judge Paula Zenas, a district court judge in Maryland, said to the Trump regime, "You are hereby ordered. Find Abrego Garcia. I don't care how you do it. This is your responsibility from El Salvador, where you sent this individual where he should not have been. And you saying, oopsies, we made a mistake is not enough. Return him here immediately." We'll talk more about that. At the same time that's happening, another federal judge who we've been talking about, Judge Boasberg, signaling that he seems inclined to hold Trump administration officials in contempt over the deportation flights, or as I call them, I think more correctly, the kidnapping of individuals, of migrants, and sending them to concentration camps in El Salvador without due process against the court's order. And the Judge Boasberg, detailed the timeline very specifically about when his order was made, what the Trump regime knew, when they knew it, how they defied his order. And during this hearing, Judge Boasberg was like, y'all realize, and he was really giving it to the DOJ lawyer. You knew the timeline. You knew specifically what I had ordered. There was no reason to ever even rush this. There would have been no harm that was caused if you just complied with the order, but you wanted to do it to defy the court. You wanted to make those propaganda ISIS, this is me talking now, ISIS style videos to put out there in front of the whole world so that you can say, look what we did. You and Bukele, the leader of El Salvador, wanted this moment together, so you intentionally defied my order. That's what Boasberg was saying. Well, why don't we break each of these down? Harry Litman from the Talking Feds YouTube, Talking Feds Substack, and Talking Feds podcast. Why don't we start with what federal judge Paula Zenas, what she did, what she ruled, and then let's go to Boasberg, Harry.
Okay, and they are really two very big events. Boasberg in particular was just surgical. All right. See, now it's interesting. What was their position? Oh, we there's nothing that can be done now. He's in El Salvador jurisdiction, which is a little cute given that they took him there, are paying for it, etc. And then the administration, this Trumpian act, you may never ever say you're wrong. And we had the vice president saying, well, he's a member of a gang, it doesn't matter. And he is not. The evidence that he might be is completely threadbare. But and same with Bondi and same with Trump, as opposed to, it wouldn't matter who he is. Just as you say, he wasn't supposed to be there, and they shipped him to this. And you're right, really. This prison just is as I understand it, no one has ever gotten out of. It's not really, it's a concentration camp that you stay in and are tortured. And this guy who doesn't deserve to be there was just abducted and put there. Now, the interesting thing is they were first saying, we can't do anything. Oops, sorry, just as you say. And she was having none of it. I expected she was going to be tough on them, but I expected the order would read, don't give me that. You're the ones who are paying for it. You're in relation with it. You can get him back. I order you to make best efforts, bring him back. And if that doesn't succeed, I want them a sort of Boasberg treatment. I want the guy who negotiated and said it couldn't be done in my court Tuesday, etc. That's really not what she did. Her order and everything she said in court gave zero nod to this, national security framework, or that it's El Salvador. She says, I find I have jurisdiction. And if you have jurisdiction, you have jurisdiction. And what she means over the administration. And I want him here. She says effectuate, but I want him here 12:59 on Monday. So there's not even. Now, if they show up 12:59 and say, oops, 11:59, sorry, on midnight on Monday, and they say, oops, we couldn't do it because we tried hard, etc. Man, she is gonna, absolutely beat them lumpy and bumpy. They might then try to say, well, you can't order us, but I don't think it'll fly. I mean, this is so down the middle of the most important work that judges do, right? Reversing this kind of Kafkaesque nightmare and unbelievably both flagrant and costly deprivation of due process. So I think just like Boasberg, she's now a dog with a bone and is not going to let it go. But what was interesting is just a flat out order, not even paying any attention to the argument that there's no jurisdiction because he's in El Salvador. You want to set things up for Boasberg, or should I just keep
Let's
going
talk
on?
Judge Boasberg. Everybody knows that Boasberg is the judge who got the emergency application assigned to him, random assignment, right as Donald Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, and declared these warlike powers. And Trump said there was a hybrid war against Venezuela, and Venezuelan army was here in the form of the gang members. The Trump regime then kidnapped all of these people and gave them no due process at all, and then sent them to El Salvador. Before he sent them to El Salvador, the ACLU and other groups anticipating this is what Trump was going to do, filed their emergency application. It was a brilliant legal move, getting ahead of what was going to happen before it happened. They then held the hearings before the people were transferred to El Salvador. We've now learned the facts, right, Harry, that the people in the plane knew that they were instructed not to go to El Salvador, and they try to come up with different excuses. First, they were like, the Trump regime's like, well, it was an oral order, we don't have to follow it. Or we were over international skies, so there was no jurisdiction over the American plane internationally. And then they were just like, well, it's a war, so we don't take orders from judges. And then Judge Boasberg, just so people know about him, right? I mean, this is a guy who was first off, he was appointed by George W. Bush originally to the Washington, D.C. Superior Court, then elevated by Obama, if you call it that, to the federal courts, federal versus kind of the district Superior Court. Someone who was then appointed by Chief Justice John Roberts, in 2014, to the FISA court, worked his way up to be the chief judge or the presiding judge of the FISA court, Foreign Intelligence Services Act. So he knows a thing or two about this area. Yale law grad, guys, the top person in this area, the perfect judge to randomly get assigned this case. So he knows this. This is the judge that Trump's been attacking relentlessly, and he's not letting up. He's saying, I think you violated my order. I think the issue becomes, Harry, what do you do now? There's so many people probably in El Salvador who shouldn't be there. How do you unwind it? I think Boasberg has to do with what Justice Merchan, the state court judge, had to navigate. Like, how do you not fall into Trump's traps and be the assertive judge that you are without Trump saying, oh, you see, look, this judge hates me. And how do you maneuver that? I think that's what he's trying to figure out now. What do you make of all of it?
Yeah. Methodically and meticulously, and that's what he's been doing. He's really been very sort of one foot after the other. It was a tour de force yesterday in this hearing. Boasberg was a great prosecutor himself, a homicide prosecutor in D.C., and he basically filleted this poor guy from the administration, and in a really he wouldn't let it go. It's been the watchword. I think we're so lucky that that's the case, by the way, because we want to flush it out now. And having Boasberg do it, by the way, it's one other addendum to his resume: law school, Yale, roommates with Justice Brett Kavanaugh. So it's really just ridiculous how they try to trash him. But a couple points. So how do you do it? And they have done everything to bob and weave and not give him the information that he wants to decide if they violated his order. And they gave this excuse and that. And then they said, oh, it's picayune and you're making a big deal of it. Let it go, Judge. And he could have, like a lot of judges. His daughter has gotten the Domino's pizza treatment. You know what that is? People from MAGA land have given the kind of "we know where you live," actually sending pizza to her. I mean, she's 24 years old and afraid, and you can't blamer, but he is sticking with it. He is being so sort of principled and dutiful and meticulous. And just a couple points. So they bob and weave, and then they start to say, we may have to do the state secret privilege here. He said, oh, really? Well, yes or no. And they brought, why would you bring this state secret privilege up after several days? But they thought they had the ultimate trump card, as it were. And they said, well, we might. And then they played it. And Boasberg, totally, this was news that didn't get reported generally, Ben, blew it out of the water yesterday. He established first meticulously that the information they're not giving him is not classified. And then he said to this poor DOJ lawyer, can you give me a single case in which the state secret privilege was used or authorized for unclassified information? And the guy stammered and spit out a case that was wrong and had to withdraw it. So I think state secret privilege is all done now. And then one other point he established on the notion that you've raised, what's the big hurry? It turned out at the time of his order, every single one of the 250 people had already been rounded up and were in custody. So no possibility that they could go anywhere. And it's either to grandstand or more likely to get ahead of the law before they could be ordered not to, that they spirit them away. But the argument is overwhelming that at that point you have to stay and go and give a modicum of due process and the like. So right now, Boasberg is on the edge, and I think he's going to pull the trigger, and I think he's going to be sustained of holding them in contempt. Now, it's going to be really tricky and interesting. Who exactly gets held in contempt? What exactly are the penalties? Because it's not a civil contempt. It's essentially criminal contempt. And that's going to be a little tricky, but that's where I think we are going. And he pretty much said that's where we're going yesterday.
Yeah, I think we are reaching a new chapter in the escalation of what the Trump regime is doing, testing out their dictatorial powers. And, this is where the federal courts also wanted, as the Trump regime escalated, I think the federal courts knew, look, we don't want to have to go here. But at this point, this is a full-fledged attack on the judiciary. And we, unlike the House of Representatives and the Senate, where the Republicans have given up what it means to be a co-equal branch, where you're supposed to protect your territory and your turf, also just out of self-interest, was how the framers viewed this, is that the federal judges are saying, no, this is our turf. There's still law in the United States. These laws matter, and you're not going to show up in court and behave this way. And, here's the thing. Trump has his dictator shtick, Viktor Orban-like, Putin-esque kind of down pat. The issue, though, is, then you have like a J.D. Vance who does, a version of it that comes off disingenuous and corny and cheesy and kind of weird. But then you have these other people, the 35-year-old, 40-year-old, 45-year-old, 50-year-old DOJ lawyers often skew on the younger side, younger 35, 40, around my age, who are the ones being sent in here because the older people don't want. They know what they're doing. They're putting their 40-year-old DOJ lawyers in the meat grinder to go in front of the Boasbergs. And then you have the people like my age who were in law school when I went to law school, who are like the MAGA versions of me. I hate to be those people, but they're going into court. And these federal judges, Harry, who rose through the system when you did, and you were responsible in the 90s for vetting a lot of these people too. These are really experienced, well-qualified, knowledgeable law and order people. So they're seeing this like, there's Mario and then there's Wario. Wario in this situation is like the MAGA 40-year-old lawyer who's going in, who's trying to prove himself to the Trump regime, but doesn't have the facts or the law because they're carrying orders that's antithetical to our system. And they're butting heads with like the Boasbergs. And the Boasbergs are grilling these people, and these people are looking stupid in court, right? They're getting stunned by it, Harry. I'll give you the final word.
Yeah, well, so that's a really big piece of it. We're doing our podcast on Monday about just what's going on within DOJ and how are the career attorneys handling all this stuff. And you're right, they either are sending in some luckless person who, in the area who is saying again and again, every time I see this, it's like a Hitchcock nightmare for me. A judge, and he's, I don't know. I'd have to, to be the lawyer going in before a judge and not be able to answer the basic questions. Or in some instances, they have brought in kind of high political appointees like the chief of staff to Bondi, et cetera. And, but they have a combination. The administration is really showing a defect here. I mean, even by its own terms, I think. This notion of never, ever, ever saying we screwed up, is really grading poorly on judges. And something else, going in quickly with lawyers who don't know what they're doing. Look, I think they've been unconstitutional quite a bit, but I also think they're getting their heads handed to them and getting judges really to turn against them. You know what that's like when you're in front of a judge and you've lost credibility. I think if they, had been more careful about their positions and a little bit more, thoughtful about training the lawyers who right now are sort of, completely alienated from the top brass, they might not have gotten beat so much and so badly. So this is, there's another theme here that this brings up tangentially, which is, man, they suck in court, and that's worse than it should be. And that, by the way, that's a deprivation for all of us, right? They're supposed to represent the United States, and yes, and the district courts are really seeing it as their jobs to clobber them. We will see, of course, the drama will be as things get high. Just today, the Supreme Court reversed a district court over an education matter. When you're on the sort of abstract record without the stooge in front of you who's probably lying, and it's just, do you have to defer to the executive? That'll be a scarier moment, because we'll see what especially the Supreme Court does with that abstract proposition. But at the ground level, where the facts are being developed and they're coming in with nothing, in the hands of a good judge like Boasberg, it's just like being naked in public, basically.
There you have it. We've covered it all. Wario, naked in public, Trump regime, contempt. And we hit it all. Everybody hit subscribe. Hit subscribe. What was that show on, was it the Travel Channel? Naked and Afraid. Everybody hit subscribe. Let's get to 5 million subscribers. Subscribe to Talking Feds YouTube, Talking Feds Substack, and the Talking Feds podcast run by Harry Litton. Thanks, Harry.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.